Okay, and we're going to move to introductions now.
Thank you for that introduction, Nathaniel. I'm Julia Campbell. I'm the Deputy Chief of Streets for the Boston Streets Cabinet. I oversee the Department of Infrastructure and Design, which is the team that is designing and constructing this project on State Street. You might have also met in previous meetings Chief Franklin Hodge. He had conflict this evening and could not attend. And if we move to the next slide, the team members that are here tonight will introduce themselves.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Jeffrey Alexis. I'm the Chief Design Engineer with the Public Works Engineering Division, and I also serve as the Project Manager for the State Street project. With that, I will turn it over to my colleague over at BTD, Dan.
Hi, my name is Dan Merrow. I'm a senior engineer in the infrastructure and design team. I'm also a professionally licensed engineer looking over this project from the BTD perspective.
And my name is Nathaniel Fink. I am a planner with the Boston Transportation Department.
My name is Carolyn Radish. I'm with GPI. We are the engineering design consultant for the State Street project.
Thank you. And I do want to also acknowledge that we have other team members from the Streets Cabinet. We have a Chief of EMS, Jim Hooley, and we do have some elected officials that have joined us this evening. If you are from an elected office, please feel free to identify yourself in the chat, and we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Great. So this evening's meeting is an opportunity for us to give you primarily a design update. We're going to start by going over the project background, basically why this is an important project and why that our team is bringing the perspective that it is to this project. We can also recap the public engagement that has happened so far. And we're going to give you opportunities to see how our design is responding the best way we can to what we've heard from the public so far. We're going to close with an update on our project timeline and then have an opportunity for questions and comments. Next slide. Great. So State Street has been a part of Boston since Boston became Boston. It is one of our oldest streets. It is a very important historic corridor and an important commercial corridor. We recognize the importance that this street serves to bring business to this part of downtown Boston. And we recognize that the current state of State Street is not supporting the needs of the city and the businesses today. We want to do this project in part to revitalize the street. Next slide. We recognize that State Street is a walking street. Currently, we don't feel that the configuration, and the data shows that the configuration of this street doesn't really support the mix of users that are trying to use the street today. The primary point being that pedestrians are actually the most frequent user of State Street, and they outnumber cars 2 to 1. But the space that's allocated to pedestrians is not really adequate to support the number of pedestrians that use the street on a daily basis. So you'll see that our design provides more space for pedestrians and really brings safety and mobility for all modes to the center of State Street. Next slide. We have 3 goals that we are using as our overarching policy for citywide that we are bringing to this project. The first is equitable access. On the left, this is an image of a less able-bodied older adult who is currently not able to access all of State Street. Currently, the street doesn't have ADA-compliant curb ramps at every corner. The sidewalk is not meeting current standards for access. And what we want to do first and foremost is bring this street to a state of good repair. And in doing so, we have the opportunity to provide wider sidewalks that are compliant with current standards. And we can also bring opportunities for other things along the way. Next slide. The second goal is to increase the modes of walking, biking, and transit. A lot of the people that are walking on State Street are going to and from our robust transit system. And we also have a lot of people that are accessing State Street and parts of Boston through bikes, and currently they're not able to do so in a safe manner. Next slide. Which brings us to safety. Our goal citywide is to bring deaths and serious injuries on our streets to zero. Currently, that's not happening across the city, and it's not happening on State Street. State Street is on our high injury corridor, and through the analysis, both that we've done at the city level and that MassDOT has done at the state level, State Street rises to the top of the most dangerous streets. You can see on the right the mix of modes that are involved with crashes on State Street from 2015 to 2023. And our most vulnerable road users, pedestrian and bicyclists, make up the vast majority of people that are experiencing crashes. So again, you'll see throughout our design that safety is at the core of every change that we're proposing. Next slide. And finally, what plans have happened in the recent past that are teeing up this project? Most importantly, Connect Historic Boston. This is the plan that allows us to have a citywide view of downtown Boston and how we connect it across the different modes. State Street was identified in this plan, and this is really the project that executes that vision that's been standing for many years on the books. And again, bringing just a state of good repair is one of our primary goals for State Street. With that, I'm going to hand it over to our project manager, Jeff Alexis.
Next slide, please. Excuse me. All right, once again, good evening, everyone, and thank you all for joining us. For this next slide, I'd like to quickly go over the public engagement that we've completed to date as part of the Reimagining State Street project. As you might be aware, the city started this project back in 2019 when we held a pop-up meeting on State Street and conducted an online survey where we received over 1,200 responses. After collecting a ton of data relating to traffic, pedestrian, and cyclist volumes, the crash data, as well as a study of the existing parking and curb line uses along the corridor, we came back to the community for 2 virtual meetings where we shared our findings, shared the responses from the survey, and discussed some preliminary design options that we developed based on this information. Balancing the city's goals regarding safety and multimodality, the engineering, as well as everything else that we heard from the community, we further developed the concept, which we shared back in the meeting of June of 2022. Throughout the duration of this process, we've continued to meet with State Street stakeholders, the Board of District Council. We met with an advisory group between 2020 and 2021, and we implemented a pilot as a proof of concept and to provide much needed safety improvements in the interim as we further develop design to meet the needs of all users. Next slide, please. So tonight, we would like to share the final design to explain the changes that we've made to respond to the previous public input. Ultimately, we've heard you and we've listened. Our design consultant, Carolyn from GPI, will get into that next, but I just wanted to mention that although we are at the final design stage, there are still areas of design that we need your input. One of the major sticking points regarding the redesign has been curbside usage and needs. We would like your opinion regarding pickup and drop-off zones, as well as short-term and long-term parking along the corridor. With that, I would turn it over to Carolyn to jump into what we've heard.
Thank you, Jeff. What we've heard from the public basically since we unrolled the concept in June of 2022 falls into 4 broad categories. First, to create an environment where businesses can thrive on State Street. In terms of street design, this is a beautiful world-class street where pedestrians feel safe and comfortable, and curb uses that serve the needs of the businesses. We've heard that the bicycle network should be connected to State Street. We've heard that it's important to ensure emergency vehicle access along State Street and to maintain the abilities for cars to safely travel the roadway. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through what we're maintaining and changing from the current pilot design with respect to those 4 points in terms of creating an environment where businesses can thrive broadly. We are prioritizing the pedestrian experience. We're providing wider sidewalks wherever possible. We're relocating the bike lane to the south side of State Street to create more room for loading. The project will be fully accessible. Green infrastructure, landscaping, and upgraded lighting will be provided throughout the corridor. Next slide, please. In terms of a safe pedestrian street, we are maintaining a single travel lane as in the current pilot design. The changes from the current pilot design include reconstructing the sidewalks and curb ramps to improve accessibility, providing safer, more visible crosswalks across State Street at all locations. This is daylighting the pedestrian crossings by pushing trucks and cars away from the sidewalk, from the crosswalks, so that pedestrians are visible as they're crossing the street, shortening the crossing distances by narrowing the travel lane and getting pedestrians out of harm's way as quickly as possible. Through the center of the project, from approximately McKinley Square to Kilby Street, there will be a flush street condition where sidewalks are level with the street, which provides better accessibility and ease of use for people using strollers and wheelchairs. As mentioned before, green infrastructure and landscaping and lighting will be upgraded throughout the corridor. Next slide, please. Curb uses that match the needs of the businesses. What we are maintaining from the current pilot design, we are keeping parking loading on the south side of the street between the Surface Road and McKinley Square in the vicinity of the Harborside Inn, and on the south side of State Street in the vicinity of the Custom House. Changes from the current pilot design is that we are moving the bike lane to the south side of State Street, separating it from parking and loading on the north side of the street. We're adding loading on the north side of the street between Commercial Street and India Street across from the Custom House. And we're adding a parking space in addition to the existing parking on the north side of the street between Broad and Chatham Row in the vicinity of Al's. Next slide, please. Connecting the bicycle network. We're maintaining the separated bike lane along State Street as in the current pilot design. But as we've mentioned, it will be moved to the south side of State Street. The separated bike lane will continue west of Congress Street to Government Center, creating a fully connected State Street to major bike infrastructure on Cambridge Street and Tremont Street. On Milk Street, there will be an eastbound bike lane that will be designed as part of a separate project, and that will be the corollary to the westbound State Street bike lane. Next slide, please. We are ensuring emergency vehicle access. So the design includes all standard emergency access features that have been verified in review. Emergency vehicles may use the bike lane to bypass traffic on State Street. There is a consistent 20-foot corridor that's maintained on State Street to allow for emergency vehicle access. Changes from the current pilot design include mountable curbs that are included where needed to maintain a 20-foot emergency access corridor. Next slide, please. We're maintaining the ability for cars to safely travel on State Street. As we noted before, we're maintaining a single lane of traffic going up State Street. Traffic capacity on State Street is largely governed by the signal at Congress Street and the number of pedestrian crossings and not the number of travel lanes. Adding an additional lane would reduce pedestrian safety, which is counter to our core goals in this area. The pre-pilot wide single lane of auto travel created opportunities for unsafe driving on State Street. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through the recommended design. I'm going to move east to west in the direction of traffic flow. So moving from the right side of your screen to the left side of your screen, following the letters shown in red. So starting with the letter A at the Surface Road and State Street, we're adding a protected intersection, which helps to slow and calm traffic as it's turning right onto State Street. In this location, there's a conflict between bicycles and pedestrians crossing State Street and the heavy southbound right turn movement from the surface road. Moving through to the area marked with the letter B, the bike lane is along the south side of State Street at this location. There is parking and loading adjacent to the bike lane. There is a wide sidewalk on the north side of State Street. Moving to the letter C at McKinley Square, we have the beginning of the Flush Street condition. Moving to the letter D, we have in front of the Custom House, we're maintaining the parking that exists there and adding parking on the north side of the street, just west of Commercial Street. The bike lane continues along the south side of State Street, moving to the west, and there's widened sidewalks in various areas that you can see drawn in with landscaping and the darker gray color. On the next slide, we'll continue. So from Broad Street, we have daylighted crosswalks at Broad Street, which is a very heavy pedestrian crossing. We have where the letter E is noted, the parking at Al's, this area has been expanded. We have wider sidewalks along the north side of State Street, moving through the area around Merchants Row. And then at Kilby Street, the Flush Street condition changes, and we have basically a 6-inch curb between the sidewalks and the street in a typical condition. The protected bike lane continues to Congress Street, and 3 travel lanes are maintained at Congress Street to move traffic through. As we noted, the signal is the primary governor of capacity on State Street. Next slide. So now we're going to go through some eye-level views of the changes for State Street. In the existing condition, again, at the easterly end of State Street, just west of the surface road. In the current condition, we have parking and loading on the south side of the street, a single travel lane, and the separated bike lane on the north side of the street. In the final design, next slide, please. In the final design, you'll see the bike lane on the south side of State Street, a parking lane next to it, the single travel lane. We'll see the wider sidewalk with mountable pavers. You see the 20-foot emergency vehicle access corridor that includes the travel lane and a portion of the mountable sidewalk extension on the north side of the street. In this location, the bike lane is at sidewalk level and separated from the parking and loading by a 6-inch curb. Next slide, please. And this is the existing condition at what we call the pinch point near Chatham Row, which is the narrowest part of State Street. In the existing condition, we have a single travel lane and a separated bike lane on the north side of the street. Next slide, please. And in the final design, again, the bike lane is on the south side of the street, separated from the travel lane by a concrete mountable barrier that allows emergency vehicles to use the travel lane and the bike lane for the emergency vehicle access corridor. Next slide, please. Now we're up in the vicinity of Al's, just west of Broad Street. In this area, we have a single travel lane on the south side of the street in the existing condition, parking and loading, protecting a bike lane that is on the north side of the street. In the final design, next slide. We have the separated bike lane on the south side of the street, again, separated from the single travel lane with a mountable concrete barrier, and parking and loading on the north side of the street. The emergency vehicle access corridor is the single travel lane and the bike lane with the mountable barrier. Next slide, please. And approaching Congress Street, we have 3 travel lanes at Congress Street and a separated bike lane in the current condition on the north side of the street. And in the final design, in the next slide, we have the bike lane on the south side of the street. This is at street level, separated by a concrete island from the 3 vehicle approach lanes to Congress Street. And then we have a wider sidewalk on the north side of State Street. Next slide, please. The connection from State Street west of Congress Street, the bike lane continues up the south side of State and Court Street and connects with the bike lanes that exist on Tremont Street and Cambridge Street. In this section, we are looking to mill and overlay or repave the roadway, improve ramps where they're needed, and install the separated bike lane on the south side. But this is not a full reconstruction like State Street. Next slide, please. And with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff to talk about the project schedule.
Thank you, Carolyn. As we continue to engage with the community and stakeholders regarding the sidewalk improvements, we're aiming to finalize the design by the summer. We will be advertising the State Street for reconstruction later this fall, with construction expected to begin in the spring of 2025. Construction completion is tentatively scheduled for the end of 2026, and the estimated cost for this project is $8.7 million. Next slide, please. And with that, thank you all for listening. Thank you all for participating in this process. We do have questions that we've seen in the chat. If you would like to raise your hand in regards to questions, as I mentioned, like we are still looking for input in regards to curb management along the corridor. Once again, thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. So as Jeff noted, we're going to move into the questions, comments, and answers period. So some of you have been dropping questions in the chat. We have been monitoring that, and we will alternate between live questions and responding to questions in the chat. And just a note on how the queue works if you want to ask a question. So at the bottom of your screen, you should see either a pop-up list that says, if you 3 dots that says more, and if you click on that, you can raise your hand, or you may already see that if your window is fully expanded. If you raise your hand, you will be added to the queue. If you put your hand down, you will be removed from the queue, and if you raise it again, it will be at the bottom. So that's just a feature of how Zoom works, and it's kind of the best way we have to manage the order. So if you do wish to speak, raise your hand and keep your hand up. We're going to do our best to get through all the questions and also to cover the broadest range of topics that we can. So with that, let us go first to...
Nathaniel, before we get into questions for everybody,
Yes,
I think a few electeds would like to say a couple words.
Sure. Yes, I realize that we have some folks who joined after the start of the meeting. So I am going to turn it to Councillor Ed Flynn.
Hi, this is Ed Flynn. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for giving me a couple minutes to speak, for hosting this meeting. I represent this area. I represent this neighborhood. I first want to say thank you to the businesses and the residents for their advocacy over so many years. But I do have to say to the businesses and the residents, I don't think your voice was heard during this process. I don't think your voice was respected during this process. I went to almost every meeting with residents in the business community on State Street, and I think you were disrespected during this process. I don't like this plan. I don't think there was community involvement. There was not a willingness to listen to residents, to listen to the business community. I'm very concerned about so many aspects of this plan, especially limiting access for emergency vehicles. I do understand that emergency vehicles will be able to use the bike lanes, but I want to go on record and say very clearly, I'm against this plan based on so many reasons, community process and public safety. I realize people will disagree with me, and that's fine. But I answer directly to the residents. I answer directly to the businesses. People have a right to argue with me and tell me I'm wrong, and that's fine. That's my job. But I owe it to the residents and I owe it to the business community to advocate for you. You weren't treated with respect during this process. I'm disappointed. I'm not supporting this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn.
Thank you, Councillor Flynn. We hear your comments. I'm sorry to hear that you feel like anybody has been disrespected in this process. That is actually the opposite of our goal. And we did hear very disparate voices in some of the rounds of comments that we did hear from constituents, from residents, from business owners. There was definitely not a consensus of one voice of what the community as a whole wanted. We're doing our best to navigate the in-between, which is keeping everybody safe. We're not willing to compromise on that as first and foremost, and then doing our best to accommodate everybody's use of the street as best we can. There are many voices on this project, and I hope that people do find that we've been able to find a respectful and safe way to honor our city and its residents.
Thank you, Julia. Why don't we go to a question that was surfaced in the chat? We had a question that was if State Street is also an emergency exit from the waterfront and how this project will affect emergency access. Would anyone on the city team like to take that question?
I'm happy to answer that question, Nathaniel. Hi, everyone. Just a reminder, I'm Dan Merrow. I'm a licensed professional engineer, and safety is my job. The big change that's coming to State Street here that will make it more effective and more safe than it currently is now is that part of this is we have to maintain a 20-foot right-of-way so that there's room for emergency vehicles to always get through. Currently, we don't have as much space as we would like there. With the new design, the emergency vehicles will be able to use the bike lane area during emergencies to navigate around the traffic, which may or may not be stopped, blocking blocking the road completely. So this basically gives a free open corridor for any emergency vehicles. It's going to greatly increase their ability to get through here when we have actual emergencies.
Yes, we've certainly gotten a lot of questions about emergency access. We're going to go now to somebody in the queue. So it looks like the next person up in the queue is Mark Margulies. I'm going to have you on mute now.
Thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you all. I do think it's interesting to see the bike lane moved to the other side, and that certainly has some advantages. But I would like to point out the fact that the Federal Highway Administration's Guide for Improving Pedestrian Safety at Uncontrolled Crossing Locations, which is what we have here, recommends curb extensions, otherwise known as bulb outs. I see you have some of them, which is great, because that's a way for pedestrians to be able to see oncoming traffic, and we want them to be as safe as possible. But they also recommend that curb extensions not extend or be interfered with by bicycle lanes. So if we genuinely want a safe pedestrian environment, we, again, for, I don't know how many times we've said this, we encourage you to have a bi-directional bike lane as a part of the bike system on Milk Street and make State Street a safe pedestrian and vehicular environment, trying to make this street, which has its pinch point, as you noted, and has a lot of traffic, do all these things is just too much. And everybody in the neighborhood is opposed to it, as Councilor Flynn said. I understand there's some people from outside the neighborhood who feel differently, and we certainly need to respect that. But if you want to know what's the community thinks, that's it. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. I can answer the one question there, which was about bump outs. I live and breathe safety regulations. That's why I'm here. That's why I'm at the city. The purpose of bump outs is to increase visibility. That's what we're looking for, because vehicles are dangerous, and we need to get the people out in a place where vehicles can see them and slow down in a safe spot. So you'll notice on the north side of this project, we have an abundance of bump outs that keep parked vehicles from getting too close to the crosswalks and increases the pedestrian visibility in those locations. So we get all the visibility from that on the north side. On the south side, there are no longer any parked vehicles. The bump outs are there to provide visibility around these parked vehicles. So when you take these guidelines, you really need to understand how they're applied everywhere. And the application isn't necessary on the south side because you already have the visibility, because we already have a bike lane and no parked vehicles.
Thank
Yeah. Sorry, was
No.
someone chiming in?
No, I was just saying thank you. I didn't realize I was I wasn't.
Oh, thanks, Mark. And I want to also acknowledge your question about an alternate bike route on Milk Street. So what I heard, and what I believe we've also heard from other folks at the Wharf District Council, is a desire to have the Milk Street bike lane project include a two-way bike lane, and for the State Street project to not include a bike lane. Is that a correct summary? I'm not sure if the Zoom setting might have disabled the unmute again, but I believe that from what I've heard from folks with the Wharf District Council, that is the case. So I would say probably the most overarching reason to have a bike lane on State Street is that, like it is a major route for pedestrians and an important route for vehicles, it is also the only and the best route to serve westbound bicycle traffic. We have an emerging network of safer, protected bike lanes throughout downtown. And the nexus of those is at Government Center, which is at the intersection of Tremont Street and Cambridge Street. State Street is the most direct westbound route to that destination that serves connecting people to points beyond. Milk Street for westbound bicyclists is significantly less ideal from the perspective of directness. So from the overall network and kind of providing good connections from point A to point B, that is a reason why we would have a bike lane on State Street. There are also some more in the weeds reasons why Milk Street having a two-way bike lane would be significantly more challenging to design. And for those reasons, we're moving forward with the plan as shown. And I am going to move on to another question, a live question from the chat. So the next person in the queue is Tito Jackson. I'm going to ask you to unmute now, please.
Thank you very much. I want to thank all those who are attending this evening. And I just wanted to note, while I was on the council, one of the things that actually really was a big deal and actually was a heartbreaker was one of the large buses actually struck someone and there was a fatality. So that's something that I actually think about. And obviously, State Street is a place where many of our buses are actually moving about. And over the past 4 years, the Wharf District Council has shared its alternative plans that include bi-directional bike lanes on Milk Street. We shared them with Mayor Wu. We shared them with City Councilors Ed Flynn and Gabrielle Coletta and the public. But the BTD, as well as Public Works, despite promising to do so, has refused to reconsider its plan. The Wharf District Council has provided BTD a proposal for a safer set of bike lanes on Milk Street based upon BTD's own proposal for Milk Street, and received no feedback in a letter and until tonight. In a letter dated December 18th, 2023, NURA again invited BTD to a community meeting to present their State Street pilot program for community input and hear from those already experiencing heavy traffic gridlock. And I would just say, as a former elected official and as a member of the community and as a business owner, I'm really disappointed in this process. I'm really disappointed in the tone and tenor in which residents as well as business owners have been spoken to, have been discounted, disregarded, and disparaged in this process. And so, I think there is an opportunity for us to be thoughtful and do the right thing. And I personally believe, I love the people who I work with at the Wharf District Council. They have been too polite to you guys, and I believe that this pilot was a fait accompli, and essentially a pilot was implemented in a way that actually basically it was a question that was asked and answered by the same folks. So I think there's a lot. A lot that actually has to be done to actually get us up to where we need to be. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Hi, Tito. Thank you for your comments. I again will respond first, as I did to Councillor Flynn, that I have not seen disrespect provided to any members of the public or business community, and I would, just please let us know. I know that our staff and your staff and you all in particular, we talk on a regular basis, and we do want to make sure that everybody is respected in the way that they are communicated with and listened to. So if anybody felt that way, I definitely apologize, and I have not necessarily seen that myself. Moving into the content of your questions, the City of Boston has absolutely considered what the Wharf District Council has, yes, very clearly communicated. The fact that we are not doing what the Wharf District Council is asking just reflects that we have considered it and we are deciding against it. We do have a full staff of licensed engineers and professional individuals, as well as consultants also serving on this team, who evaluate the needs of the whole city, the needs of network connectivity, the safety of all users, and we do not agree that a two-way bike facility on Milk Street would replace the need for the infrastructure that we're proposing on State Street. I also heard you mention that people are stuck in traffic, and I agree. That is a true statement in many places in this city. There is nothing that we are willing to do on this street that would increase that other than what we're doing. If we were to increase the number of lanes that would be traveled by automobiles on State Street, that would only induce more traffic. That would not provide for a safer environment, and it wouldn't actually reduce the traffic that's happening because the traffic that's happening on State Street is coming from other places. We do have plenty of information that we can share and talk about here if that's what people want to talk about. Where traffic comes from, it's controlled by the ability of the street at the intersections to pass cars through. It's not necessarily governed by the number of lanes for automobiles that are on State Street. With that, I will ask Dan, who is our professional engineer licensed in the state of Massachusetts, to directly respond to anything about safety.
Thank you, Julia. Like she said, I'm not going to say it any better than that. I did closely look over the Wharf District Council's plans. The biggest thing that sticks out that just makes it a no-go is the 2-lane scenario. There's no world where having 2 lanes through unsignalized intersections, which is most of State Street, is safe for pedestrians. You'll always get a double threat. You'll always lose the benefit of these bump outs that we discussed earlier. You won't have the visibility. Smaller children, slower people will not be seen. If one car stops, it's not guaranteed that the second will. This is the biggest safety problem. This is why we won't change State Street to 2 lanes. It will fundamentally never be safe if it is a 2-lane cross section for vehicles.
Thanks, Dan. Just checking, does anyone else on the city side have anything else they want to add? Okay, so I'm hearing nothing, and we're going to move on to some questions that came up in the chat related to bicycle operations. So we'll take 2 of them. So one of them is a question related to how people on bikes will get from the bike lane on State Street to the bike lanes on Cambridge Street and Tremont Street. Dan, you've been working hard this meeting, and I'm wondering if you might want to take this one and just kind of walk us through the schematics there. I can
Sure. Do we have the plans?
slide.
So as you can see, the bike lane is on the south side here through State Street. And in order to make this work a little better, we've continued it on the south side of Court Street, west of Congress Street. So the bike lane will be fully protected along Court Street as well, where it'll connect into Tremont and Cambridge. The setup here has the bikes on a protected corner. The bikes will be able to cross the street during the pedestrian phases because it's already in the middle there, so there will be no conflict between pedestrians and bikes. There will be no conflicts between bikes and cars. It'll be completely separated. They'll have their own signals that they can use there, and this keeps them safe and protected on the south side of the street. And then whether you want to go north on Cambridge Street or south on Tremont Street, you can still do that in a fully protected environment the whole way.
Thanks, Dan. And while we're on this topic, it looks like we got another question about how the loading and parking zone in Section D between India Street and Commercial Street works with the bike lane. I'm going to pull up that slide. I believe that is not the right one. I think that this is the one. Yep.
Would you like me to answer this one as well?
If you wouldn't mind.
Sure. So the Custom House has rights to have parking along that side of the street there. So they have to, basically, we have to provide parking for the Custom House there. To provide parking for the Custom House there, we either needed to put the bike lane on the inside and the parking on the outside, or do this scenario that we have here. The reason we couldn't protect the bike lane behind the vehicles here is because we are trying very, very hard, because it's very important to maintain the 20-foot clear for emergency access. If we had put the bike lane on the inside, we would end up not with 20 feet of clear to allow these emergency vehicles to get through, and we'd end up with a narrow travel lane and a narrow bike lane. So I don't know if we have a cross section here, but basically what this is the bike lane will have a bump up out of the travel lane, and then there will be a bump up out of the bike lane to the parking. Daniel's trying to find it. This is fine. We could stay
this
here.
may be the best representation we have.
So that parking is not going to be as high turnover, I think, which is something we're kind of trying to discuss here. Is the ideal is this would not be high turnover parking because this is for the Custom House and they're used right there. So we don't expect there to be a lot of vehicles crossing here, and we are trying to prohibit making the movement at speed with the kind of bump ups to the bike lane and bump up to the parking as well. So that maintains what we need to give to the Custom House. It maintains the 20-foot safety cross section that we need for emergency vehicles, and does the best that we can do with the bike lane for this section, knowing that we are legally obligated to keep that parking.
Thank you, Dan. We're going to move on to the next person in the queue in the live chat, Matt Murphy. I'm going to prompt you to unmute now.
Hi, everybody, and thanks to the team for this presentation this evening. Thanks to all the members of the community and the public who've shown up for this. I had a couple questions, mainly stemming from the meeting that the BTD had on July 15 of last year, July 15, 2023, at which time the members of the Wharf District Council and other stakeholders, property owners, community members, residents, attended this meeting with the Deputy Chief, Julia Campbell, and submitted the alternative bike lane plan. And it's a great relief tonight, Nathaniel, to hear from you. This is the first response that we've had since July of 2023 regarding the alternative plan that we put in, which we certainly did not expect to be embraced in whole, but we expected that it would be studied. And at that meeting, the deputy chief assured us that we would hear back from BTD by the fall, which we have never heard back from BTD regarding the plan until your comments this evening, Nathaniel. And that, I would say, feels disrespectful. Despite our requests for a response to the plan, there has been no response until this evening. I also, at that meeting, would point out that we asked for data for the numbers. And a good example, you showed the percentages of crashes, or I'm not sure the terminology. Percentages can be misleading. During that period, I don't recall the period that's on there, 2015, or I don't have that, we don't have that slide up, but what are the hard numbers? How many collisions did take place during? I think it would be much more useful to actually see numbers rather than percentages. So I wanted to make that point. We have not received any data, despite the fact that BTD has said that there is data, and I mean data from pre-COVID and up to the present time. I don't know what the traffic counts are. If you go to the Wharf District Council's website, you can see a video of a typical day. I walk from the North End to Broad Street every day for my work, and often see traffic backed up all the way down Service Road into Commercial Street. And the other point I would just want to make, I'm sort of mystified by Daniel's, or maybe it was Nathaniel, who characterized Milk Street as being inappropriate. In our perception, those of us who live and work in this area, Milk Street is much less trafficked by vehicles. It's a much less commercial area, far fewer storefronts and curbside businesses, and we see it as being ideal. It is not, in terms of its direction, it's not a straight line, but it is, we believe, far safer for bidirectional bike lanes. And there are precedents around the city for bidirectional bike lanes. I live in the North End, and on Commercial Street, there are bidirectional bike lanes that seem to work perfectly well. So that was my comment. We would like to see actual data, and we would like to see more responsiveness than a meeting that takes place on July the 15th and hear nothing until March 13th. So that's where the sense of disrespect and not listening and not responding and discounting, that's where that sense comes from. Thank you.
Hi, Matthew. I will respond to your question and comments here. So yes, I think there was also a question in the chat that I'll address now about why the meeting that you're referencing in July was not included on our engagement timeline. And that's because that wasn't a public meeting. This is a public process for a public street that we are facilitating, and I do apologize for the delay in getting information out to the public about the design choices that we are moving forward with today. I don't have a good explanation for why, other than very boring, and nobody wants to hear excuses about bureaucrats with letting contracts expire and not able to advance work for many months. That's basically what happened. So we only recently were able to pick up work again. And we did feel it was actually the most respectful thing to respond to the public as a whole, rather than to provide to be quite honest, to provide exclusive access to information. We didn't want to do that. We wanted to provide information to the public as a whole, which is what we're doing this evening, and to follow up with the individual conversations with the Wharf District Council, with other groups that have facilitated access to city officials. So that is why you did not hear from us from some time. It is not meant to be disrespectful. We are doing our best to speak to everybody, the public on the whole, because not everybody has the ability to call a meeting with Councillor Flynn and myself in a room full of officials. So again, apologies for the delay. We are moving towards finalizing design and moving to construction as quickly as we can.
Thank you, Julia. So I wanted to see if anyone else on the team wanted to talk a little bit more about the data question.
I can talk about the data a little bit.
Thank
Nathaniel, if you want to go back to the pie chart slide, I can explain that.
I will pull it up now.
Okay, so this is injury crashes. So this isn't all crashes. This is just injury crashes that require an EMS call. So injury crashes on State Street from 2015 to 2023. The numbers are, there were 45 injury crashes. Bicyclists were 17 of those crashes, 38%. Pedestrians were 18 of those crashes, that's 40%. Motor vehicles were 10 of those crashes for 22%. So that is the overall number that was requested in terms of the crash data. In terms of looking at the metrics, State Street is identified as part of Boston's high crash network street for bicycles, which means that it is in the top 3% of streets within the city of Boston for injury bike crashes. And it has also been identified through Mass DOT as part of a pedestrian high crash cluster, which means it is in the top 5% of streets in the Boston MPO region for pedestrian crashes. So I hope that clarifies the data. Again, the vision is 0 fatalities and serious injuries, and that's what we're working towards with this design.
Thank you, Carolyn. We're going to move on to Ann Fitzgibbon in the queue. Ann, would you like to unmute?
Hi, yeah, there are so many things I want to say, but so a lot of people have already said them. So I'm just going to support our counselor. A lot of the other comments that have been of the same feelings. I want to tell you, I lived in the city till I went to college. I lived in Colorado for 40 years after that and have moved back. And I have to tell you, I'm seeing the same things with this city that I saw back in the 70s. You don't listen. You're not caring. And as to, I can't remember who the last person who spoke, but she just wants to move to construction as soon as possible. You're not listening. I come from a city that was incredibly bike friendly, and they had the same issues. We had main arteries where bike paths went down. And then as you moved off those arteries, you did have to zig and zag because it didn't make sense. And this project does not make sense. I walk down State Street daily. I see the problems with it. The other thing I don't see are a lot of cyclists. I do see the problems, and I do think State Street has to be addressed, but this plan is not going to do anything to solve it. I mean, even drawings, I cannot understand when I look at them. When you look at these graphics, you see a very wide sidewalk. That sidewalk can't be that wide. I mean, you've got a sidewalk that's twice the size of a sidewalk, and then you have a whole planting area. I mean, that doesn't make sense. You know, we have not been heard. I've lived here for 2 years. My address, my partner's address, his address are public records. Our address is State Street. We have not ever received any public notice, anything. The only way I knew about this was running into a neighbor. So you guys aren't reaching out to us and you're not hearing us. So, also I drive up State Street all the time. And yes, it's a mess. I also see that emergency vehicles when it's one lane, don't get through. So it does need to be addressed, but this plan doesn't address it. I totally support. Even before I heard about this, I came up with the idea, you got to move this to Milk Street. So I'm sorry if I'm emotional about this. I feel blindsided by this because I didn't know about this. And you know, I hope you listen to us. I really do. Historically, I'm going to venture that you won't, but I hope I'm proven wrong. Thank you for your time.
Anne, thank you for your comments. We are going to move on to another comment. Cynthia Kelly, please go ahead.
Cynthia, you appear to have remuted yourself. Oh, there you go.
Okay, so first of all, I just want to reiterate what many of the regular residents have said. One of the first comments was, you know, no evidence of not reaching out to the neighborhood. There's all kinds of evidence of that. And I was under the impression that this meeting was going to be like a two-way, you know, give some feedback, whatever. And what I'm hearing, unfortunately, is that you guys have decided already, which is completely unethical. And the safety person, he mentioned, well, if there is an emergency, there are emergencies all day long that need access to State Street. And I also walk it, I take cabs through it, and I have yet to see one bicycle. But what I do see is all kinds of clogged traffic and all the emissions going out into the air, where if they could, you know, efficiently go through, we could eliminate that. You know, and I see this picture, but I'm telling you, I'm there almost every day. The other point is, it is our major access to Mass General, etc. And that should take priority over everything. And I think we all agree that we want less cars, more bike lanes, no disagreement there. However, this is not, in my opinion, the right solution. And there are many streets in Boston that you have to cross multiple lanes that work just fine, including Congress Street, for example. And I would be interested to see the statistics about all the streets in Boston compared to, you know, what you've decided to focus on for State Street. But what I'm most disappointed about is that the city is not listening. And I have lived all over the country. This is my first experience with that. And about the comment about the Wharf District Council, while you didn't respond, that is not professional. That's not caring. And you could respond to them and everybody else, but to not respond is unacceptable. So that's it.
Hi, Cynthia. This is Deputy Chief Campbell. Happy to respond to your comment. Yes, so we did actually respond to the Wharf District Council at the same time that we are presenting information to the public. That was the letter that was provided to them yesterday. And in regards to the style of our engagement process, Nathaniel, could you go to that timeline slide, please? Thank you. So we've been engaged with the community, all aspects of the community as much as we can since 2019. And like I stated earlier, we've heard really disparate things from different groups within the community. Some people want 2 lanes of automobile traffic on State Street all the way through. Some people in our last round of public comment wanted it to be shut down to cars completely. So we feel like keeping the single lane of travel that has been the way that the State Street has operated, we are making no change to the vehicular access. Maintaining that is the way to go by providing wider sidewalks, wider plantings, putting some green infrastructure in, and reorganizing the street so that we can have a protected bike lane with the space that is not being used well currently. It's currently just a wide open street with no lane markings. And that's, or I'm sorry, before the pilot went in and it was a wide open street with no lane markings. The pilot is organizing the street to provide the structure for safety so that we have still the single lane of automobile traffic. But now, because there was actually extra feet of road that were not, being used in that one big lane, we can provide a bike lane with protection. And in the future state, after reconstruction, we can also use some of that space for the wider sidewalk. All of those things are safety aspects. Again, I'll just restate what we said earlier. If we were to provide 2 lanes of automobile traffic, we would not, in fact, be making traffic better, and we would actually be making pedestrian safety worse. I don't think we've heard anybody say that they don't support pedestrian safety, and so that's what we are focusing on, and that is what the design provides.
Okay, am I allowed to respond?
That's not usually the way that things go, but if you feel like you have some additional question, you do still have the ability.
Okay. There are more comments because I feel like questions aren't really being addressed anyway. So it used to be 2 lanes. And then there were the pilot program went in, and then you use COVID data to support, what you want to do. So that's one point. Second is the sidewalks are not dangerous right now. They're better than Beacon Hill and Back Bay. They're just fine. Pedestrians are fine. So, and then, we've all worked in corporate, well, I have worked in corporate America. You can, change data to support anything that you want it to. But what really matters is what's really happening. And I don't believe the data that you are proposing represents what's actually happening. And, we're smart enough to know that. And all I'm hearing is this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to do. I thought this was going to be a 2-way conversation, and I'm very disappointed.
Cynthia, thank you very much for your comments and your feedback. I think that this is a good place to maybe pivot a little bit into a comment that was raised in the chat earlier, which was about the public realm. Since you did mention sidewalks, and I think we can all agree that pedestrian safety and the pedestrian experience are paramount. So while the condition of the sidewalks may be acceptable to some folks, right now they are failing on all counts from an objective perspective that we would use to evaluate for pedestrian accessibility, and particularly for our legal requirements to provide accessibility under the Americans with Disabilities Act. So for instance, we have sections of sidewalk that are pockmarked and have various different overlays of asphalt and are, frankly crumbling. We have curb ramps that are not designed with the appropriate slopes or have any of the other features that are needed for accessibility. And I'm wondering if anybody on the city side would be able to talk a little bit more about the green infrastructure that we are going to be putting into place and any of the other amenities that will be respecting both of the State Street historic character, as well as to really emphasize it as not just a place to pass through, but a place to gather and to linger. Maybe someone on the design team can talk a little bit more about some of those features.
I can speak a little bit to a couple of these comments. Going back to the data comment, so we've been collecting bicycle counts on State Street going back to, I believe, 2019, 2018. What we see is that in the summer, we have 350 to 400 bicycles a day going up State Street. They're a lot smaller than a vehicle, so sometimes, they slip by without them being seen. In the winter, it's about 200 bicycles a day. So there are a number of bicycles on State Street, and we do have that data. Another comment had to do with the green infrastructure. So in this image here, we're seeing, more amenities to the pedestrians to make it safer and comfortable and the neighborhood more resilient, as the green infrastructure can absorb stormwater and help with some of the nuisance flooding that occurs with heavy downpours, which become more and more frequent as the years go by. I just wanted to just reiterate Nathaniel's comment about the sidewalks being fine. ADA, they do not meet ADA for a number of reasons, including the curb ramps, the cross slope of that, and also there's obstructions in the way that preclude people being able to get through, and the surface is not is very uneven and crumbling, as you can see in some places. Was there any other questions, Nathaniel? Did I catch everything?
Yeah, I think I just want to pull back just a little bit and kind of circle back to one of the big comments that we got was about wanting State Street to feel appropriate for the historic context and to feel like a world-class destination that serves people who live in the neighborhood, people who work and do business in the neighborhood, as well as the thousands of tourists that come to State Street every day. And addressing these pedestrian accessibility issues are one of the main ways that we can do that.
Yeah, I would just add
Yes.
that, again, through the years, over the period that we have been working on this project, we've received hundreds of comments, we've had online surveys, and always pedestrian safety and the condition of the sidewalks are always the number one concern that emerge from all the general public surveys that we've had. And, it has been one area that everyone had agreed on that the sidewalks are not okay. There was even a video when we first started this project that was on the TV news. There was a place where people typically tripped and fell, and the retailer that was there at the time always had kind of a safety first aid kit to help people because there was that tripping hazard there.
Thanks, Carolyn. So let's move on now to a person in the queue. Robert Rudolph, I'm going to ask you to unmute.
Thank you. So I want to start by just saying I echo everything that Matthew Murphy said this evening. And the chief of streets, Joshua Franklin Hodge, should be on this meeting. His office scheduled this meeting. His office moved this meeting. And if he wanted to be on this meeting, they could have made it at a date and time that he could have been here. He's intentionally chosen not to participate in these meetings. And every time we've met, we're told he has a conflict. We appreciate that Deputy Campbell is here, but respectfully, Deputy Campbell was just appointed less than a year ago to her position and was not in the city of Boston, was not part of this process since 2019. The issue here is about one of the most historic streets in the city of Boston, and it should have the utmost attention of the city, and it doesn't. The fact that the chief of streets is not here shows that. It's not about bike lanes. We all like bike lanes, but a bike lane on State Street is not functional and not safe. We've repeatedly gone through this since 2019. The last public meeting that the city held was on June 15, 2022, over 2 years ago. We've repeatedly been told that we would be provided raw data. The raw data has not been provided. The last time raw data was updated on the City of Boston State Street Improvement website was, again, June 6, 2022, and the raw data only goes through the end of 2021. It's indicated on the website that the city received 212 survey responses from 212 individuals about State Street. And as a result of those 212 surveys, they come to the conclusion that 96% of the survey responses are supportive of the State Street plan. 212 responses from a street using their own data, which is traveled by 10,000 vehicles per day and nearly 30,000 pedestrians per day. So they're drawing a conclusion from 212 for a street used by over 40,000 per day and telling the public that they have full support, 96%. The meeting on July 13, 2023, at which Deputy Campbell attended and which has been discussed tonight, was not solely with the Wharf District Council. There were members of many other businesses, property owners, and stakeholders from State Street at that meeting. And at that meeting, as Mr. Murphy said, we were promised a revised plan by September 2023 and the raw data, neither of which we got. Tonight's the first time we've seen the plan. You had all of our contact information and emails. If there were issues or contract approvals that needed to go through causing delays, you knew how to contact us. You know how to contact us when you want us to pay taxes on our properties. But this plan, you just make the changes, you make the decisions, and you don't hear from the key stakeholders involved. I appreciate the revised plans that you've presented tonight and that some of our comments seem to be heard a little bit, but I'm still unclear on how 4 loading spots in the middle of State Street are going to accommodate loading for all of the buildings and property owners and businesses that operate that have no loading docks and front load. 4 spots for an entire street on one of the most important merchant streets in the city of Boston. The safety issues haven't been addressed. You continue to say that emergency vehicles will drive through bike lanes. Have you seen the bike lanes in the wintertime when they're full with snow? Have you seen emergency vehicles stopped in the middle of State Street, unable to get through? Because I have on a daily basis. You haven't addressed the consequential issues that the traffic issues and parking issues that the bike lane on State Street has caused on Merchants Row and Chatham Street, where trucks are double parking to load, making it almost impossible to turn onto those streets at various times of the day, making it impossible for a fire truck or ambulance to get down those streets when trucks are double parked loading. You haven't addressed temporary parking, pickup, drop off, how tenant moves will take place front loading onto State Street, Uber or Lyft, for all these buildings that have no commercial loading docks and no access from the backs of their building. So I think there's a lot of work to do. I wish that when you're going through this revised process, you continue to engage with those who are stakeholders in the community instead of just finalize a plan and come to a presentation and tell us this is what's happening. There's still been no discussion with any of the stakeholders on State Street about how construction would hypothetically take place, how hollow sidewalks would be addressed, and how these plans will be effectuated. And I think there's a lot of work that still needs to be done. And I stand in support with the Wharf District Council and in support of the Wharf District Council's proposal.
Robert, thank you for your comments. I'm going to turn it over to my team for response.
Great. So I'm sorry to disappoint you with my presence this evening. I am the official from the city that is overseeing this project's design, and I promise you I am qualified to oversee the team that is also licensed professionals overseeing this project.
I never said you weren't qualified or that I was disappointed you were here. I'm disappointed that the Chief of Streets has repeatedly not attended our meetings.
Well, I'm happy to say that he trusts our judgment and he trusts us to move forward with this project. He does run a team of several hundred people. addressing some of the points that you brought up, I do believe that we can share some more of the data that we do use to make the decisions that inform this design. In regards to some of that, I mean, I think Carolyn has some of that in her back pocket. If we want to talk about it now, that's also something that we can publish on the website for everybody to see. And I would like to actually ask Jeff, our project manager, to jump in and answer some of the points about loading zones and the changes that we made in this current design. I don't believe it's just 4 spaces. I think there are many spaces that are available for loading. And that's actually a great point. That is the point that we are looking for feedback on tonight. If you'll remember when Jeff was introducing the comment section for this evening's meeting, we are looking for that discussion this evening of how we can best support the businesses and everybody looking to support, Uber Eats, pickups, things like that that are happening with the curb regulations. Those are things that we can still make changes on, and we are very welcome. We very much welcome those comments this evening. Jeff.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Robert. Appreciate your comments. I mean, we've been working on this project for a few years now, and we've been working with the Wharf District Council as well as the stakeholders in regards to these improvements. One of the things that we wanted to point out today was the fact that we did relocate the bike lane from the north side to the south side. One of the major issues that kind of arose from the meeting that we'd had with Chief Franklin Hodge as well as with Councilor Flynn was that you guys wanted parking, you guys wanted commercial loading on the north side, which is why we looked at making that transition. Ultimately we're going to be moving forward with a 1 lane on State Street. I mean, but my colleagues have already expressed, the safety concerns and issues in regards to the corridor. The number of crossings at this location that allows access from Faneuil Hall to the sides on the southern side, whether it be Kirby Street, whether it be towards the Greenway. We're ultimately looking at providing safety for pedestrians as well as cyclists along the corridor who ultimately use it. In regards to the survey responses, we have conducted a number of surveys as part of this project. I mean, we had online surveys. There are surveys that we did receive only 200 responses. I believe there might have been 2 online surveys where we received around 200 or more responses. The initial survey that we conducted for this project, we did receive over 1,100 responses from individuals, and as my colleagues mentioned, a lot of them kind of spoke to the inadequacies of the street. How they didn't accommodate pedestrians, cyclists, just the chaos in regards to how the roadway functioned. The roadway technically hasn't been multiple lanes. It was 1 wide lane that people kind of try to maneuver around when they could. There's a certain section along State Street where it's a pinch point where you have no choice but to drive in 1 lane, and then of course it opens up again. So this has been the issue along the corridor that has been the cause of a lot of the crashes. That the pedestrians as well as the cyclists have had kind of suffered through. But in regards to the loading and the parking, that's something that we did want to talk about today. We do have a number of spaces along the corridor. I believe it is outlined on one of the maps that we have here. But that is something that we ultimately wanted to take a look at and make an improvement on from the pilot, as well as from the existing conditions. The existing conditions or the prior to the pilot didn't really have a set curbside use along the corridor. So that's something that we're looking at providing as part of this project as well. And we're hoping that we can get that input from you guys.
Thank you, Jeff. So we are going to move on. I just want to note that we've got a number of people in the queue who would like to speak. And so I'm just going to ask folks that if the point that they would like to make has already been made, to please just say what you would like to say and consider how long it takes, because we do want to make sure that folks who would like to speak can all get a chance. And we will do our best to do that. So we're going to move on to John Larrabee now. John, you may unmute.
Thank you. Thank you, Nathaniel, and the entire team. I share the city's and the transportation department's vision for State Street to be a welcoming, safe, world-class thoroughfare connecting Boston Harbor to the old State House. However, as you've heard from many people who live and work in the neighborhood, I am concerned as well about that the design will negatively impact the only direct route for vehicles to travel west from our neighborhood to Mass General, Back Bay, Beacon Hill neighborhoods and others. And I understand that when the Big Dig was planned, State Street was designed as the westbound vehicular route from the Wharf District and North End towards Back Bay. So the implications of cutting the traffic capacity in half is of great concern, and I believe particularly ill-advised for this neighborhood, especially when there's a better and safer alternative on Milk Street.
Thank you, John. We're going to move on to Kirsty Hostetter now.
Actually, I'm sorry, Nathaniel. I do want to just make a quick point and give our Chief of EMS, Chief Hooley, an opportunity to chime in about access for emergency vehicles if he feels appropriate before we go on to the next question. I do just want to directly address, I know that we've mentioned it a couple of times, but I want to be very clear that the only way that we would be able to provide more room for vehicles would be to add a lane of traffic that did not exist before, and that would not actually increase the flow of traffic. It would just allow more cars to sit on the street, and the processing of those vehicles through the street would still be the same that it is today, because they only can move at the speed at which the signals process them. And Chief Hooley, do you feel so inclined to make a comment about emergency access and just the way that we do our review and the way that we provide the 20-foot clear?
Yeah. Good evening. Yeah. What's been our experience on a lot of the projects, whether it's, the center bus lanes on Columbus Ave or a lot of places where we've had redesigns. When we do have the lanes marked out like that we can use over, we do take advantage of that, excuse me, when we're on responses. So it's being able to utilize, for example, whether it's bike lane, bus lane, or other things when we're using lights and siren, then that it actually does help us out at times. It can get us around. It's especially if we have situations where there's trucks either unloading or something else, that we have the option where we can use that dedicated lane for our use as well. And so it is actually helpful.
Chief. Sorry, Nathaniel, I'll hand it back.
That is quite all right. So it looks like the next person in the queue is Kirsty Hostetter. Kirsty, would you like to unmute?
Yes, hi there. I'm really excited about this. Like I said in the chat, because I live in East Boston, so the blue line is really my only option into the city. But then I have to get over to Cambridge, and since the blue and red don't connect, I bike. Otherwise, my commute would take like so long. So really happy about this. I just wanted to hear a little bit more. You talked about it a little bit, but about how your plan is going to help with all the puddles and stuff. Sometimes when I'm waiting for owls or when I have tried to bike State Street, which I really don't anymore, it's been almost impossible because there's so much water. So does the design account for that on like the sidewalk and the bike lane?
Hi, yes, thank
For the
you.
question. Yeah, Jeff, do you want to talk about this?
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Kirsty. Appreciate it. Yeah, so in regards to the grading and design along the corridor, ultimately, I mean, Public Works, our job is to make sure that the water gets into the drainage system. We're looking at a number of options along the corridor, including green infrastructure. We are looking at trench drains in order to accept a lot of some of the runoff along the sidewalks. As you can see in this design, we are looking at tabling parts of State Street. So I mean, ideally, I think we're looking at from let's see, I think it may be India-ish, oh no, McKinley Square, all the way down to Kilby Street. We are looking at tabling this corridor. So in doing so, we ultimately have to make sure that the water drains correctly into the system. So we're looking at providing green infrastructure along the corridor. So whether that be some infiltration along the corridor. We understand it's a blue line tunnel. It'll probably work more like a pool in certain sections of the corridor because of the blue line tunnel, but we are looking at providing more infiltration towards the west side of State Street, which would include, drainage infrastructure, trench drains, as well as green infrastructure as part of it.
Thank you, Jeff.
No problem.
So the next person up is Stacy Thompson. Stacy, would you like to unmute?
Yes, thank you. And thanks to the whole staff and everyone on tonight. I know that by the time we get to 8 p.m., everyone's antsy to leave. So I appreciate everyone listening and paying attention and being part of this conversation. I am the executive director of Livable Streets Alliance, but I'm speaking tonight as someone who works on Milk Street and has worked on Milk Street since 2017, and also made the decision to keep our office space during COVID because we knew how important it was to support the businesses that are in this community. I also frequently bike on Milk Street and State Street, and just want to say that, one, I'm happy to talk about why Milk Street is such a terrible option. I work on that street and I actively avoid biking on it for a number of reasons. So I support the city's thorough work they did to review that plan. I know that we didn't get into the details tonight. I understand that frustration, but really appreciate knowing that I will be able to safely continue to bike on State Street as I have for many years when I'm supporting the businesses along the corridor. And then my question tonight is really around some of those loading zone questions. And I'm curious specifically if the city has considered piloting dedicated spaces for Uber and Lyfts where the little pin sort of forces people to go to dedicated areas. I know that it doesn't always work out that way, but I know the technology is available and there are lots of tourists, particularly in the summer, and there might be ways to work with those companies to control that activity and get some of those Uber and Lyft drop-offs off of State Street. So I'm just curious what that process has looked like and if you've considered that.
Thank you, Stacy.
I
Sorry,
can
Jeff.
probably half answer that question. Oh, unless Jeff,
I hear Dan chiming in.
Yep, sorry. We don't have our resident expert on corralling the Uber and Lyfts here tonight, but I know he is working on something to that variety. We've tried it in a couple areas. I don't know the results of that, but more specifically, that is a part of why we're here tonight, because we have the amount of parking that we have on State Street and making it useful for people that are doing high turnover, useful for people who are doing loading is what we need. We want to get people to be able to use the street, not block the street, or just, park there all day. So that's what we want to hear, is when and where we need those things. So that's not a full answer. That's not the best answer. That's as much as I could give you at this time, though.
Thanks, Dan. So the specific technology that Stacy is talking about is called geofencing. And if you have used Uber and Lyft, particularly at Logan Airport recently, there is the requirement to walk into the central garage. That is certainly a technology that can be employed. However, not being the expert on this myself, and as Dan mentioned, we do have a colleague that we work closely with who works with the TNC companies around pickup and drop off issues, and is kind of his job is basically around curbside management. I do understand that there are sometimes challenges with making geofencing work in an urban environment. And as Dan said, the folks who we share a very strong interest in State Street, as everyone here in this meeting does. And we know that many people here observe it on a daily basis. And as much as we do go out and observe and try to make our best judgments about what types of curb regulations would be most effective, we definitely can make this design work even better when we hear from you about specific things that you think would be useful in specific locations. Curbside management is an issue across the entire city, and we are always trying our best to get it right. It is one of the things that tends to be easiest to change because we can adjust signage. But we are also kind of chasing it because trends and technology change, and vehicle usage change too. So again, feedback on curb regulations and that type of usage would be very helpful and appreciated. So why don't we move on to, sorry, did I hear someone else on mute from my side? I thought I heard the unmuting sound.
Yeah, that was me, but you kind of covered it.
Okay.
No worries, thank you.
So the next person in the queue is Cherry Del Greco. Would you like to?
Hi, this is Cheryl Del Greco. I'm with the North End Waterfront Residents Association. While we are not in the Wharf District area where State Street lies, I have been part of many of these meetings. And I would again like to invite the chief, Franklin Hodge, to come to a newer meeting. We are having a meeting in April on the 11th, and we would love to have him attend and talk to us about this plan. Well, as I said, while State Street is not in our district per se, we will feel the brunt of the traffic that backs up. As you all know, we are a very small, condensed neighborhood that does suffer from a lot of traffic and backup. And Surface Artery Road absolutely does back up onto Atlantic Ave and onto the side streets. I'd also like to hear from Boston Police and Boston Fire as to how they feel about access and riding over the bike lanes, if that's possible, please.
I don't know if we have any Boston Police or Fire here tonight.
Yeah, Zach Crossan is on here and Sean Martin is on here. They're Boston Police. I don't mean to put them on the spot, but I would like at some point like to hear from, Boston Fire and Boston Police as to how they feel about emergency access up State Street as someone who uses it frequently, particularly to access Mass General. It's a key thoroughfare for us, for those of us who live here. But I would like to invite BTD to NURA. I think it's really important that you come and talk to the North End community. There are a number of people on this call from the North End tonight, and I think they should hear this presentation, and I think you should have their impact and their input, please.
Thank you, Cheryl.
Is there someone I can work with? I know I've worked with Sierra D'Amico to try to get the chief to NURA. Julia, we'd love to have you too, the team, whomever, but we would like you.
Anne and Francis.
Sherry, oh, sorry, Sherry, I'm nodding along.
My name is Cheryl.
Sorry, we had a flurry of unmutes.
Nathaniel, I was just saying, Sherry, no problem. Happy to send a delegation. I think Nathaniel was pointing out our communications director and our lead for communications that there are main points of contact. But yes, happy to be more engaged and to have a discussion. Yes.
That'd be great. Please, you can coordinate through Sierra D'Amico, who is on this call and is the North End Community Liaison. And by the way, my name is Cheryl, not
Oh,
Cheryl.
I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's all right. A lot of people, and it's after 8 o'clock, so I feel.
We regret the mistake of pronunciation. I'm very sorry.
Not a problem. We're all tired.
Of course. So the next person in the queue is Suzanne. Suzanne, would you like to go ahead?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good evening. I'm not going to go over what everyone else has said. I'll simply say I've been involved with Boston government for over 20 years, and I've been involved with this project since being appointed to the advisory group back in, I believe it was 2019. And I have to say that this process has been the most difficult process I've experienced with city government. And I find that it is not, it's unfriendly to the community. You're almost unapproachable when it comes to dealing with this project. A statement was made earlier that you only do public meetings like this one. You don't do community meetings. That's not the way it was my understanding that Boston government ran. I felt that the neighborhoods and the communities, since my involvement before with Mayor Menino and then Mayor Walsh, that access to the communities by the government departments was essential to running the city. We're not seeing it here. The fact that State Street has become an totally unacceptable street. This is a main thoroughfare in Boston. No one in streets has had the courtesy to even do repair work, to fix the potholes, to fix cracks in the sidewalk so that it looks like the terrible street that it looks like. And I do believe that this was intentional, that the design here was to make this as uncomfortable as possible, because our community has been advocating for being involved with this process since 2019. And I just will only add one thing, and one more thing, and that is, you talk about disrespect and you don't believe that you've been disrespectful to us. Well, apparently you were not at the meeting that was held 3 years ago with Chief of Streets, Franklin Hodge, where he entered the meeting prior to even being introduced to any of us and informed us in a very loud voice before he sat down that he had no intention of changing his plan. So I don't expect you to respond to this, but I just wanted to go on record that what you are saying and what you are doing are two different things. One more thing, we had requested data way back in 2020. Some of the data which you show here in the slide presentation, we have never seen any of it. And I don't know what else to say. I won't say anything else, but I do feel that you should know this has been a very difficult experience for the Wharf District Council and for the Wharf District neighborhood. Most of the folks who are on this call from the Wharf District neighborhood are here because we notified them, not because you notified them. Thank you for listening to me.
Thank you, Suzanne. I will just make clear my earlier statement. I don't believe I said, and I certainly was not trying to say, that we don't do community meetings. My statement was in regards to the timeline that we're showing, and that is showing public engagement. So no, it does not show the many meetings that our team members have gone to, where we have smaller discussions with community groups all the time. That's not reflected on this timeline. That's what my statement was meant. And you are absolutely correct that communities make up this city. And that's one of the things that makes Boston strong and great. And I do just want to also address the comment of the deterioration of the street. That is 100% not intentional, but I will say that the reason that we cannot repair a lot of the sidewalks that are along State Street are because there are areaways under so many of these sidewalks. Those require actual structural work to repair the sidewalks. We have to go through a process to engage with the property owners. Many of you will hear from us soon about that. We are not able to fix those sidewalks on our own as a city, and it's very difficult to maintain them. So that's why it takes a full capital project to be able to fix the sidewalks along a street like State Street, where that is the case. And I believe we've covered a lot of these other points, and I do just hope we can move past these, issues of disrespect, and we are trying to engage in an inclusive, respectful process. And we do thank everybody for their attendance this evening. With that, I think, Nathaniel, we probably could move on to the next question to be respectful as we can of everybody's time.
Thank you, Julia. So next up, we have Tim Carr. Would you like to go ahead and unmute?
Hi. Yeah, hi. Good evening. Thank you for everybody that's on this call. Nathaniel, thank you for doing the best that you can to moderate these calls. I know it's not easy, but thank you for putting it together. I second everybody else's frustration with the way that this has all been rolled out, but I won't get too far down in the weeds for the respect of everybody else's time. I do have a couple of questions regarding safety. I do think that extending the crosswalks, the bump outs there at those crosswalk sections, it will be a great upgrade. I think the majority of the people on this call agree that State Street needs an upgrade desperately. But I think a lot of people on this call, and I second their opinion, this is not it. I do appreciate the safety with those bump outs at the crosswalks. That's great. You talked about the protected, if you can show that slide with the A, B, C, and D on it, that would be helpful. But at those intersections, especially at A, I believe you talked about the protected intersection so that cars would slow coming from surface onto State Street. And I think the question was asked before about how is bicyclists traveling south on surface supposed to get over to the south side of State Street to travel west up State Street. And I guess the answer would be that they would just travel along with the pedestrian crossing there. But are those signals now fixed so that it is pedestrian only? Because a number of those intersections on State Street, turning onto State Street, turning off of State Street onto Congress are green lights and cross signals. So you're putting pedestrians in the crosswalk as vehicles also have a green light to make their move. So I'm just curious as to, are those signals going to be fixed? And my last question would be, a lot of people think that this is not going to work. Do you have an instance where this has worked, where you have taken a historically a small street, made it smaller by widening the sidewalks with a protected bike lane, with numerous loading, Uber spots and things like that? Has that worked anywhere else that you can direct us to? And my last point very quickly is going to be, I would love if there was another call with your guy that can talk about curbside management. It is horrible in the entire city. I know you guys have already said that, you know that. Working for a company that needs curbside loading and unloading, you can change the signs all you want, but with a transportation department that is severely understaffed with boots on the ground and a police department that is severely understaffed in terms of how they can police those companies that use the curb space, taxis, sightseeing vehicles, Ubers and Lyfts, I don't see how changing signage, no one reads the signs. No one cares what they say. They do what they want. So if there's no enforcement of those changes that you're trying to make, how is any of this that you've put in front of us also going to get better? So thank you for your time. And if you could answer what you can.
Tim, really appreciate all those questions. So I think the first one that I heard there was about signalization at Surface Road and State Street. Is anyone on my team able to speak to that directly?
I'm frantically trying to find that in some plans. Is anyone on the consultant team ready to answer about signalization changes at Surface Road, if any? If not, that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know if Tim is still
okay
on the call. But yeah, I mean, yeah, if you want to jump in, but yeah, absolutely. I mean, we are looking at installing new bike signals at the JFF Surface Road intersection, as well as Congress Street. We are looking at providing a phase for cyclists to get through these intersections. Dan, if you definitely just want to kind of just jump in if you have any
Yep.
additional information on
So yes, so what we're going to be providing there at A is something called a leading pedestrian interval. So if the volume of there's a threshold for volume of vehicles turning right over pedestrians and bikes, and if it is too high, we completely separate it so that there is not bikes and pedestrians and vehicles going through at the same time. If it's low enough, we get a couple more options. We're in the spot where it's low enough where we're using something called a leading pedestrian interval, which means that pedestrians and bikes get to cross the street starting earlier than the right turning vehicles. They get to get all the way or most of the way across the signal or across the street, which puts them in a great view spot for any turning vehicles. And then the right green turns on after that. So the pedestrians have the right of way. They will have already been partially or mostly all the way across the crosswalk. So it really makes it so that the vehicles aren't starting at the same time, so you don't catch pedestrians out of surprise. They get to the crosswalk first, and they get to cross it safely that way. So that's kind of how that southbound movement happens. There is they go first, they get right of way, and then cars come after.
So as always, it signals when there's a walk indication on the pedestrians have the right of way over vehicles and over bicyclists. So I also heard a question about other examples of streets in Boston where similar changes have been implemented. One example that comes to mind is the Tremont Street design project in the South End that extends from Arlington Street to Mass Ave. This is another historic commercial corridor at the heart of a residential neighborhood. And it is a street that initially had 4 lanes of traffic, several pedestrian fatalities due to the same multiple threat crash that would exist on State Street with 2 through lanes of traffic. The project brought Tremont Street to 2 lanes in either direction, except at certain signalized intersections where more lanes were needed for capacity. And it also involved doing a thorough series of business walks and many conversations with business owners and observations about how the curbside was used in order to fine-tune curb regulations to do our best to meet what the activity was on the street. Now, as you noted, it's never perfect, but curb regulations are one of the tools in our toolbox that we can use. And the main driver for that project was pedestrian safety, again, because there were fatalities there. And the overall character of the street has become one that is much safer to walk across and one that feels much safer to walk along as well, because the vehicle speeds as a result of there being 2 lanes. So it's this street is different from State Street, and that is a 2-way street rather than a 1-way street. The traffic flows at a much more moderate pace now And that also makes things feel and objectively be safer for pedestrians. That is one example I can think of, and I encourage folks, if they are in the South End, to visit Tremont Street. Does anyone else on the city side have anything they want to add about curb regulations or about other streets that may be similar to the approach to State Street?
I think you got it, Nathaniel.
Okay, so thanks folks for staying on. I know that there are a few more people in the queue and we want to get to you. So Matthew, I'm going to ask you to unmute now.
Hello, thank you. I just want to say I support this plan. When the pilot went in, I was overjoyed. I work downtown. I used to work closer to this project. Now I'm a little farther away, but I appreciate biking up here much more after the pilot. And with these changes, I'll be there all the time. I had a question about the mountable curb. I was just wondering, since I'm on a cell phone, I can't see, are there flex posts on that mountable curb?
In the parts, so there's one section where the custom house has parking available to it, and there aren't there, but for the rest of it, yes, we're starting with flex posts. Those can change. We all know flex posts don't stick around as much as you would like them to all the time. That's what we're starting with here. It doesn't mean that like we don't have other options if they don't work out, but those are the easiest thing to maintain the 20-foot clear so that the emergency vehicles can use the street effectively and still keep most vehicles out of the bike facility so that it's actually a functional facility.
Awesome. Thank you. I just like any physical protection is going to be great. And I think since this meeting is ostensibly about curb use, I think anything that would deter a private vehicle or a delivery vehicle or something from parking in the bike lane is going to be huge. Just signing the heck out of the corridor, I think, is probably the best way. But I will close by saying I just really love this project. I thank you for all the hard work from the team, from the city, consultants, anybody. I really appreciate any safety improvements downtown. So thank you.
Thank you for your feedback, Matthew. I would like to, sorry, before we move on, were there any responses from city folks? Okay. I would like to invite Cynthia Kelly to unmute.
Thank you. So I don't need a response, but because this project seems to be driven by so-called data, I just took a look at some of it. So the accidents, 45, unfortunate, but over several years, probably in line with the rest of the city. And the sidewalks, I think on State Street are better than most. If you look at Back Bay or Beacon Hill, they could use some work, certainly, but I don't think they're the worst. And then my last point is, I found it interesting that having a shop owner have a first aid kit is more important than providing access for emergency vehicles. That's it. Thanks.
Cynthia, thank you again for your comments. So I will reiterate on the topic of emergency vehicle access. We are providing the required 20 feet clear between curbs in order to allow for an emergency lane. And the space that is occupied by the bike lane also serves as an emergency lane for any type of emergency vehicle to use to bypass traffic queues. Would anyone on the city side like to add anything?
Sure. Thank you, Cynthia, for your comments. As you understand, the public right away, the roads and the sidewalks, I mean, under the authority and jurisdiction of the Public Works Department, we ultimately have to keep them at a state of good repair. The sidewalks and the roadway along State Street are in disrepair. We have codes and regulations and guidelines that we have to meet. We have to meet, I mean, the standards from our from the American Disabilities Act, as well as our disabilities commissions. Ultimately, these sidewalks need to be repaired. So that's the precipice for this project, is we need to fix the roads and the sidewalks, and then ultimately make the road safer for all modes of traffic. So, I mean, that's ideally, I mean, the primary goal for this project. I mean, in addition to, I mean, the beautifying the street and trying to bring out and that cultural fabric that State Street currently has, and then try to just improve on it. But I mean, we have to fix the sidewalks and the roadway as part of this project, and that's the forefront that we're moving forward with.
Thanks, Jeff. So moving on, I'd like to invite Raheem to unmute.
Hi, good evening. Thank you all for working late. I'm also working late, and I appreciate it. It's not easy working very late when you have friends and family. So my name is Raheem Abbasi. I'm on the board of Way 4 Taxi Alliance. We are the trade association that represents the interests of taxi owners and operators here in Massachusetts as a whole, but also mostly in Boston. I myself licensed taxi driver in Boston and also a Boston resident. Thank you all for taking on the large task of redesigning State Street 1. But I do have a direct question. We lost 2 cab stands during the pandemic. You know, understandably, there was low utilization downtown road space. We didn't really need them at that time. And, you know, but right now, as part of the mayor's revitalization plan for downtown, because during my day job, I also work downtown. There was one in front of 200 State Street, a cab stand, and at the top of State Street at 60 State. The one at 60 State was about 4 cabs long, and was one of the busiest spots in the city for, you know, just working people to make money. So obviously the street is being redesigned in a manner which probably won't accommodate a deep curb cut or curb and down, whatever the nomenclature is. But we'd like to be included in the plan for not just the State Street, but the overall downtown revitalization. And I would like to know, can we get a commitment from the team, even if it's just detailed information to stay informed and meet with you guys about future plans when it regards the taxi industry, and including, you know, taking away cab stands or moving them. For reference, also, the current one was put around the corner on Congress Street northbound, which is visibly, it's not good because you know, we're not based on apps, you can't really call a cab on. You can, but that's not really how we work downtown. It's based on visual line of sight. So having us around the corner is not great, but, you know, understandable. So we'd like just to secure commitment, again, even if it's just to have more conversations and see how we can support you and overall in this campaign for downtown. Is there anybody that would be a good point person for that?
Hi, thank you for your comment and your question. Yeah, we have been having conversations about the cab stand that was currently located or was located in front of 60 State Street. It was relocated due to the installation of the pilot and the bike lanes that are currently on the north side, which we will be moving to the south side. Unfortunately, although we are looking at making, you mean, some minor curb line geometry improvements on that side. I mean, we kind of just don't have the space to provide, I mean, a curb in at that location. If I don't believe you're probably not aware, but the sidewalks that the city actually currently owns, or the public right of way, is only about 4 feet, 4 feet from the curb line, from the existing curb line on State Street in front of 60 State Street. The rest of that parcel actually belongs, or the rest of the sidewalk actually belongs to 60 State Street, that which we're trying to work with in regards to pedestrian easements and highway easements to make, I mean, some of these improvements. So ideally, I mean, the best that we could do at this time is to try to maintain the parking on the curb stand on Congress Street. As I've referenced, I mean, we are looking at trying to provide curbside uses along the corridor, but in terms of the cab stand, I mean, unfortunately, we may not be able to make any improvements or be able to relocate it back in front of 66th Street.
So, nonetheless, I would say that we would be glad to continue talking with you about sort of issues more generally, either in relation to this project or kind of more broadly. And as I mentioned, we have a person who we work with closely who deals with all things related to curbside access. And I believe that Frances dropped her information into the chat. I will drop it again into the chat for you, Raheem, and she would be a great person to start with. So we will move on now to Marcos. Marcos, would you like to unmute yourself?
Oh, yeah. Hi, I'll be quick. I just want to show my support for this project. I think it's great that the city puts the safety, especially in such a area where car ownership and car commuting data is so low. It's so, and as dense as it is down by State Street, I think it's great that the city's putting the safety first. And I want to echo the sentiment that the Tremont Street bike lane in the south end has been a huge success. I mean, I use it to commute every day, and I've seen children now biking on it, families. Some people in my building take their kids to school with a cargo bike. I think what you're doing is really great, and I don't know, I've been biking since 2015, all season, all year, going to school, now commuting, and I've just seen how the city has been changing and how it's been getting safer. Luckily, I haven't been hit by a car. I've been punched by a driver, but yeah, it's getting safer. And I believe a lot of people that aren't here today and are here today do share my sentiment. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcos. And it looks like we've got one person left in the queue. James, would you like to unmute? James, unfortunately, I am not able to hear you. I'm not sure if you are speaking or not right now. Okay. Unfortunately, I'm not hearing James. So given that we are at the end of the queue, and that many folks have stuck around for quite a while, we are going to wind down now. I really want to thank everybody for their attendance and for providing your questions and comments. We have a little bit of homework to do around figuring out the curb regulations and getting those more dialed in. We also have more work to do, as Jeff mentioned, around the area ways. I'm going to bring back the last slide in regards to our timeline. And I just want to invite anyone else on the city side who would like to make any closing remarks to do so.
I think we're good, Nathaniel. All right.
Okay.
Thank you everyone for joining us. As Nathaniel mentioned, there are still a couple of outstanding issues that we do need to resolve before we finalize this design. I'll be reaching out to stakeholders and property owners in regards to the area ways. We understand and we know there are some issues in regards to water leaking. And there may be structural issues. We will be reaching out to have those conversations on finding the best path forward. And ultimately, we want to make this process as easy as possible. Regarding curbside usage, that's an important aspect that we'll need to determine. But I mean, it's signage. That's something that we can always change after the project's completed as well. So we'll keep trudging forward to finish the design by the summer, and hopefully we can get a shovel in the ground either later this fall or early next spring. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. So just a few housekeeping matters. I dropped in an email address, which is pwd.engineering@boston.gov. That is a great place to send any follow-up comments to. I also dropped in the address for the project website. There is an email address, or sorry, there's an email list that you can sign up for if you are not already on there. That is one of the many ways that we let folks know about any updates regarding the project. And lastly, we have been recording this meeting and we will be posting it on the website along with the slide deck that we shared. And again, we thank you all for coming and for participating in this meeting. Have a good evening.